Good day everyone, it is Caitlin and today we are making patchwork pockets. Hello and welcome. So we are going to make a lovely pair of pockets. My grandmother gave me a lot of reproduction fabrics, just little tiny squares. I think they're 2.5 inches square, and she gave me a whole mess of them. I picked out the ones that would look good for the 1830s, that are passable for the 1820s and 30s, 18teens, 20s, and 30s. This is a patchwork. You're using scraps, so you can have some older scraps too. And they're all in the red cream-ish color frame. And I know I didn't have enough to do the whole pocket, so I kind of went through my stash and I picked out fabrics that were appropriate for 30s and earlier, that were red. I decided to add in some greens and creams. So I now have a whole lot of squares of fabric. And so what I'm going to do first is just kind of lay these out because I haven't sewn them together yet. And I kind of want to get a good idea of, like, I don't want two of the same fabrics sitting right next to each other in the patchwork. That's going to look weird. So I want to make sure I space out the fabrics appropriately, kind of get it the right size that I want. And I think what we're going to do is about 6 inches, or 6 of them high and 8 of them deep. We'll start with that. I may end up making it a little bit bigger. We shall see. But right now I'm just messing with it and making sure that it's, like, all the fabrics are appropriately dispersed. That's the right word, dispersed. I'm going to make just one patchwork. I'm going to cut both pockets out of the same patchwork. That's going to be the plan here anyway. And then I'm going to start sewing by the column. So I'm going to go straight up, sew all those together, and then I'll sew each column together. That's going to be the easiest thing for me. I think I'm going to do just a double running stitch. It's going to be faster than doing a back stitch, and I don't have a lot of time to do this project, so that's what we're going to do. So we're going to start by the columns, and then we'll sew the columns together. That is the plan. You may recognize some of the fabrics in these projects. I got my 1838 dress in here. I got an 1820s dress in here. Leftovers from an 1820s wrapper in here. So you probably do see some things that that you recognize if you've been on the channel for a while. And I think before I go over too much, what I'm going to do is make sure that I get the right size. So I ended up adding one extra row just because it was just not quite as tall as I wanted it to be once I got them all stitched together. Because, you know, with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, you're taking off 1/2 inch per square, and that kind of added up, especially because the squares are really small. So yeah, I definitely needed to add one. I may have to add another row, but I'm trying to not because I'm running low on fabric. But we shall see. So what I think I'm going to do is go ahead and cut a pattern piece. That way I know how tall and how wide I need it to be. Looks like it's measuring about 11 inches tall, which I think should work. That's a pretty good pocket size. And I don't do things very precisely, so yeah. This is just going to be very basic. And you kind of start off narrower and then you kind of get thicker towards the bottom. At least that's the shape that you see most pockets. Now I make sure it's no taller than the fabrics that I'm doing, which is 11 inches. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and mark out my curve because there's usually a curve to the bottom of the pocket. And then kind of just, connect the dots. It's all very precise, as you can see. Now making the patterns made me realize I need to add at least another column. So we're going to have to move some of the fabrics around. Just again, I don't have a lot of the fabrics, so I need to make sure I disperse the printed fabrics because I'm going to add a lot more of the plaids in. So definitely need to kind of redisperse these again. I think this is like my third time redispersing them, but I am really liking this color scheme. Alright, now we're at the point where we're stitching together the columns. So I'm just doing the last little bit here. I got all my, I stopped my columns. Now I'm still, sewing the columns together. So this is the last little bit of it, and then we'll be ready to cut out our pockets. So again, just lay my pattern down, go ahead and cut right through it. It makes me so nervous cutting through hand stitched fabric. I don't know why. It's just like little bits of my handiwork are not being used, and I wasted that time, but it is what it is. So now what I need to do is to cut down the center a few inches for the hand slit. So I'm going to put both pockets together, and that way the slit ends up exactly the same on either side. And now I have a slit. I am going to have to bind this, and again, running low on fabric, but I think I have enough of the little tiny green plaid, and that's what we're going to use. So I'm going to just stitch it down, again, double running stitch on the edge of that slit, turn the whole thing under, and whip it down on the other side, and that's going to finish that edge for me. Alright, so lining. This is something I did not process prior to actually doing it, that I would need a lining fabric. And I could have very well chosen a just plain white fabric. I opted not to. I had a little bit left of the 1820s wrapper fabric, and I just decided to use that. Because why make a plain white backing for a pocket that is this pretty? And now that I have the lining cut, I can go ahead and stitch the binding on the hand slit. So I'm just using a little whip stitch, very basic, very simple. A little bit tough to get around that corner, that very corner is very hard to get into, but I managed. And when that gets done, all I have to do now is put binding around the whole thing. So I'm going to put the pocket and the lining wrong sides together so that the right sides are facing out. And all I have to do is really put a binding around it. And I have just enough of the 1820s dress, and I love that fabric. I think it's beautiful fabric. So I'm going to use that as my binding. And I could have absolutely cut this on the bias. I opted to not. And it's a very slight curve, so it's going to work well even though it's not on the bias. So I just went ahead and did straight of grain. It was easier to cut because I could just rip it. And it works basically the same as doing the hand slit. Literally just pin it across, and I'm going to stitch that down with a running stitch. And you could have done a back stitch. I chose a running stitch. And at that point, it's just turning it under, flipping the raw ends under, and of course just whipping it down like we did with the hand slit. And at that point, I have one pocket done. I have to repeat it with the other pocket. And then we're going to go ahead and attach these to a tape. Now, I could have absolutely put these on separate tapes. In fact, my other pockets are all on separate tapes. By tapes, I mean like ribbons, basically ties. I think we would use the word ties today. Tapes is more of a period term. And you could absolutely put each pocket on a different tape. And the advantage to that is if you only wanted to wear one pocket, you didn't have to wear both of them. Now, I tend to hold a lot of things at events. I imagine that now that I'm getting married and going to be having kids, I'm probably going to have a whole lot more things to have to carry. So 2 pockets is always better than 1 in my opinion. So I'm going to go ahead and put these on the same tape, and that's going to reduce a little of my waistline bulk. So instead of having 2 separate ties around my waist for pockets, I can only have 1. So basically what I did is I put the tape around my waist, I put a pin at my belly button mark, which is my very center, and then kind of measured across my belly button exactly where I wanted my hand slits to go. So on my dresses, I have a very set point on all of my 1820s and 30s dresses that my skirt seams always fit. So my skirt seams always are, so I know where my hand slits are to go into my pockets. So I just measured from that point, from my navel, to kind of figure out exactly how far apart I needed the hand slit to be from the center, and then I just put them on the tape. I had a little bit more of that very small green plaid, and I used that as the top binding. My tape is literally just cotton twill tape. It's nothing very special, and I just matched up my little marks that I made with the hand slit, so I know the hand slit would fit exactly where my pocket slits are in my dresses. And at that point, it's just sewing on the binding. This is the very last step. Just making sure there are no ridges at the top, making sure that the tapes aren't going to slide. I am sewing the tape down to the binding very well because I don't want the pockets to necessarily slide on the tape, because then that totally negates the fact that I measured how far across from the center I wanted them. So I didn't want them to move. I stitched them down very well, and then just whip the rest of it down, and I have a completed pair of pockets. And at this point, we're going to see what they look like on. Alright, well, they're done. I've actually gotten to wear them at several events, actually, okay, 2 events so far, but they are so wonderful. My other pockets are like half the size, and these are amazing. Highly recommend this size. And it's so much easier now if they're on the same tape. Because my other ones, I put them on separate tapes because I said maybe one time I want to wear one pocket and another time I might want to wear both. Always wear 2 pockets. I don't know why that was even a question, because pockets are great and you always need more pockets. But I think they're adorable. Like, they are so precious. The color scheme worked out fantastic. I know I don't think it got filmed, but I was kind of struggling finding cotton bits that would like go with the color scheme, and yeah, it turned out so well. They really, really did. And they're just like so perfect. And I can like fit my hands all the way down them. I'm not like digging in them. It's like sometimes if they're too long, you gotta really dig inside there and they're hard to get to the bottom. No problems here. Your hands just simply slip inside, and that's about that. And so what I typically did, because for one event I was kind of the person who needed to have a cell phone on me, because the guys were marching, and I was one of the people that if a guy broke down, couldn't do the march, I was one of the people to call to come pick them up. I didn't know how to pick up someone up. Someone else did that for the whole weekend, but I was one of the people who was on call, so to speak. So I put all my modern stuff in one pocket, so I didn't like accidentally pull it out when I was looking for the period, because it was like an in-character event. So I like kept my phone and my room key, just one key, in my pocket here. That way I knew that if I felt my phone vibrate, I could look in there and make sure no one was in trouble and needed me. But everything period went on this side, so like my sewing kit and what else did I have in there? Handkerchief, that sort of thing, all went on this side. So I knew if I put my hand in here, I'd pull out something, period, and not like a whole bunch of random just junk that didn't need to be seen for in a semi-immersion event. So that was super helpful. But then also, sometimes you just need to carry stuff. And so 2 pockets are great. And they are a wonderful size, once again. Highly recommend larger pockets. Highly recommend them. I really struggled whether I wanted to do patchwork pockets this time or do the embroidered pockets this time. And I kept going back and forth, but I was like, you know what? Let's do the patchwork. I think it'll look nice. And the reason I really didn't want to do patchwork is I really hate quilting. Hate it. Part of that is the old grandmas in the 4-H club who are such weirdo perfectionists. And I'm like, this is stupid. That was basically my thought when I was younger, and I never really liked it. I remember making a quilt for 4-H, and we were having some older ladies help us with the quilting. So we had like 6 or 7 machines as the 4-H club, and they were all the exact same machine. So you would think that a 1/4 inch would be a 1/4 inch, on all the machines, because they were exactly the same, bought at the same time, basically on the same production line. But the little quilting ladies were like, yeah, no. It could vary from a hair width, and you don't want that. Your quilt has to be perfect. And so we had like 3 ladies very meticulously measure a 1/4 inch seam allowance on every single machine, and 2 other ladies went after them and measured them again. And so it took like 3 hours of our time just to make sure that it was perfect. And I just sat there, I was like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. And such a waste of time. I like being efficient. And that was the most inefficient thing I could have possibly imagined happening on that day. And we ran late that day, I think because we wasted so much time on that. And it was like, really, a hair? This wasn't even a for show quilt. I mean, oh my gosh. And that was the moment I decided I hated quilting. And then as I got older, I still hated quilting. I rarely make quilts. I absolutely despise it. But as I got a little bit older and started studying period quilts, I realized that the perfectionism came in the 20th century, and that the people who were that way and very perfectionist, their grandmothers would have also thought it was absolutely ridiculous. And so that made me feel a lot better about quilting. So now I don't mind it so much because I know I don't have to be perfect in it. And it's okay if it's a little bit off, because I've seen lots of antique quilts, and not one of them has been that meticulously perfect. Not one of them. It's ridiculous. And that was such a waste of time. They were very sweet to help us, but it was an absolute waste of time. So yeah, I no longer hate quilting because of that, but sometimes those feelings of hating quilting come up. So when I thought patchwork pockets, I was like, ugh. And then I finally realized, I don't have to do them perfectly. They're my patchwork pockets. They are underwear. No one's going to see them. Well, okay, now the whole internet sees them, but in theory, no one sees them. They don't have to be perfect. And to be fair, they look pretty darn good. I mean, yes, there are some corners that don't match up perfectly, but that is perfectly period appropriate. So what I like to tell people who are perfectionists and who kind of stress about the perfection of their sewing is, especially with historic sewing, there's perfection in the imperfections. Meaning that back in the day, they didn't care. I have seen some very ridiculous, very lazy sewing techniques on some original garments that on a mannequin look stunning. And you look at that thing closely and you're like, oh, she slapped this together. That wasn't planned. Well, that is the laziest thing I've ever seen in my life. That's how they sewed. And so your perfection is keeping you from being totally accurate in your reproductions. So there is perfection in terms of authenticity in the imperfections of the sewing. So these are perfectly acceptable because they are accurate. Because I have not looked at pockets that were so meticulously hand sewn that all the corners matched up perfectly. So these are perfectly accurate. And if they all matched up perfectly and I cared that much about it, they wouldn't be as accurate. And that is my story, and I am sticking to it. I mean, that's all I gotta say about that. I mean, I have seen a woman who grew like 3 inches in her waist. This is an antique garment, and she literally took the side seam out and then just stitched a little line right across where the piping would be. So like the piping ended, and the piping ended, and then right here she stitched a line to make it look like piping, but it was all raw underneath, and there was no piping anywhere, and she just made it look like it was fine. And on a mannequin, because it's under the arm, you don't notice it. It looks great. You turn that thing inside out, and you're like, wow, that's lazy. You didn't even bother making extra piping for that. You just literally flipped under the edge and tacked it down. Okay then. I've seen so many lazy things done in historical garments, and it just cracks me up because I see people all the time, making reproductions who are just very meticulous and stressing about the perfection. I'm sitting here where you're going. Your great grandmothers would not have cared. They wouldn't have. They would have slapped that thing together, and as long as it looks good on your body, who cares what the inside looks like? So that's my little spiel on there is perfection and imperfection and the accuracy of imperfect garments. So if your garments look awful on the inside and they are slapped together, you're doing great. Now, if you're using Velcro and zippers, I might have an issue with that, especially if you're doing like living history, not just costuming. But as far as things looking weird and seams not lining up and just slapped together sewing techniques, you're doing great. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment down below. I love hearing from y'all. I love interacting with people in the comments. It's like one of my favorite things about having a YouTube channel, so please leave a comment if you enjoy the video. And other than that, have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here on Monday.